The following program discusses sensitive issues related to sexuality. Parents are cautioned this presentation may be too candid for younger audiences.
Welcome to Intimate Clarity. I'm Jason Bradley, and I'm here with Jennifer Jill Schwarzer. She is a licensed professional counselor, and today we're going to talk about a sensitive topic, but it's a conversation we need to have. Jen, what is modesty, and does it help promote a healthy sexuality, or does it suppress it?
So modesty in the most broad sense of the term is humility about yourself.
Okay.
But typically when we say modesty, we're thinking of clothing. And typically when we say modesty, we're thinking of women's clothing.
Yes.
But there's other forms of modesty. People can be modest about their wealth and wear humble clothing, drive humble cars, and so forth. But because we're talking about sexuality, let's focus in on what most people are thinking when they say modesty, and that is women's clothing. And the trend we see in the world where women are exposing more and more. We have talked about the fact that Adam and Eve had that naked and not ashamed experience before the fall, and then as a result of the fall, felt the need to cover up. We talked about body shaming and so forth. And we talked about how when a man and a woman in a married relationship experience intimacy, they get to go back to that naked and not ashamed experience. And so my thinking is that what's going on spiritually when a woman is immodest with her clothing in a way that puts on display her sexuality in a way that distracts and draws attention to her, I think there's probably a desire for that naked and not ashamed experience, but she's kind of taking a shortcut to try to get there.
Okay.
So in a way, it's a false intimacy. It's an instant intimacy where she gets that experience of feeling, exposed, not being ashamed. But I don't think it really works for her in the long run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, like everything that God has, Satan has a counterfeit for. And so where we see the God promoting love, we see Satan promoting lust. And so it's a constant battle.
But I just wonder, I think it's very helpful for us as people trying to reach people in the world to look at what's going on in their hearts behind the things that we do rather than just condemning their actions. And I really think that there's a craving for intimacy in our world today and a craving for love and affection. But what we see is that it's actually being driven out of the world. So Jesus said, because iniquity shall increase, men's love will wax cold, and that's talking about natural affection between human beings. And then we see that's Matthew 24:12, and we see in 2 Timothy 3:3 that one of the signs of the end is that people are without natural affection. So we see as iniquity begins to abound, people's ability to love one another and experience that intimacy is really being driven out of the human race, and that's a tragic outcome of sin in our world today. And so I think that a lot of what's going on with immodesty and various forms of immorality as well is just a desire for love, a desire for intimacy, and we should treat it as such. Yeah.
And again, it's God's perfect image being distorted.
Yeah, and if you think about it, intimacy is a really high-risk venture, very, very high risk. What we risk when we try to form an intimate relationship of any kind, and this isn't just a married relationship, but any kind of friendship where we're on an intimate, emotionally intimate level, is we risk being rejected, i.e. maybe they won't love me.
So there's a level of vulnerability there.
That's right.
Okay.
And we also risk wanting to reject them. If you get locked into a relationship, what if you want out? Maybe I won't like them. So intimacy for both of those reasons is a really high-risk venture. And we'd rather take a shortcut. We'd rather just get that instant gratification and feel, that sense of intimacy without having to do the work. Because really, true intimacy is predicated on sacrificing the lower for the higher, the lower of human nature for the higher, the self-centeredness of human nature for the relationship itself. And every single one of us in any kind of relationship, especially a married relationship, but any kind of relationship, if we're going to continue that relationship, are going to have to pass that threshold where natural affection is no longer gratifying because selfishness, we've been confronted with our own selfishness. And in order to stay in that relationship, we have to cross that threshold. And that requires sacrifice.
Yes.
It required sacrifice of God himself. He came to earth, and and God is a perfect, holy being, but in order to love us, he had to himself experience sacrifice. So how much more those of us that have a carnal, selfish nature need to experience sacrifice in order to love.
Yeah, and that dying to self process is an everyday thing. You know, sanctification is the work of a lifetime, so we have to constantly die to self.
Sacrifice the lower for the higher. That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right. So one of the factors, as I see it, in fear of intimacy is what I would call covetousness.
Okay.
Where I want what I don't have, and I don't want what I do have. And I see this a lot with young people.
So, okay. So this is kind of like the grass is greener on the other side of the
hill.
fence.
That's right.
Type of philosophy there. Okay.
I see it a lot with young people that are trying to find a life partner, and they are dating, and then someone maybe is interested in them, but as soon as they kind of get that person, then suddenly they don't want that person anymore. And that's based on a phenomena we call perceived value complex, where an individual perceives that which is not available to them as being more valuable. And they perceive that which they possess as being less valuable. It's kind of like the runaway bride syndrome, where whenever you have commitment, you flee, you run away. So I think a lot of young people that have come from divorced homes, where they don't see modeled in their parents that intimacy and that commitment, really struggle with this, where commitment is terrifying to them because they've never seen it acted out in their parents' lives. And so I want to say to them that you can get past that threshold, but you have to do it intentionally, because you're going to want to run.
Yeah.
You're going to want to run.
To me, it seems like you would want to build something with that special someone that's going to last. Like, why do you want to try something new here and new there and new there?
I've seen it where people will be in a relationship with someone where they actually have a shot at building a relationship with them, and they will then really back out of that relationship or panic and want to get out of that relationship, because suddenly they see in high relief all the flaws of that person. But then suddenly they're out of that relationship, or they're seeing someone from a distance, and all they can see is the good stuff. Yeah.
And could it also be that, like, maybe sometimes in the beginning of that relationship, when the oxytocin and the dopamine and all that stuff is being released, like the honeymoon stage, the individual ignored the warning signs that were there. They ignored the red flags that were there because of that initial release of those hormones. And then month, 2 months, 2 years later, they're like, wait a minute.
So you're in this relationship, and all of a sudden you're panicking because and that's the nature of sexual attraction, is that it tends to blind you. And that's another really good purpose for modesty, is that when you don't put on display those things that would summon up those hormones in another person, or those physiologic reactions in another person, or those psychological reactions in another person, you're giving them a chance of getting to know you apart from that experience. And a lot of times that can help stabilize people and give them a shot at building a more solid relationship. So I'm into modesty. I'm into common sense modesty. I've been through several different phases of my life, believing in modesty as different things. I remember a phase when I was much more old-fashioned in the way I dressed, should I say that. I think modesty is wearing what is, if we're talking about modesty as dress, it's wearing what is the most conservative, but is also something that is accepted and normal in that society, provided that society has something reasonably modest that they consider normal.
It's getting pretty crazy.
It's getting pretty crazy where it's...
Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember working for an academy, and the staff of the academy just said, we need to go to a uniform because kids can't find modest clothes anymore. So we're getting to that point, but I still think that there are decent clothes that you can wear, and you can get away with being modest and still looking normal.
Absolutely, you know, and as a guy, you know, I think a woman looks beautiful in modest attire, as opposed to, I don't want to see everything,
Putting
you know what I
everything on
mean? Like,
display.
yeah.
And the other thing is there's a double standard. Like if you think about evening wear, evening wear for a man is a suit, you're covered, you're you know, modest, and you're wearing flat shoes so you can walk and you can function. Evening wear for a woman is really high heels and all kind of hair and, you know, plunging neckline a lot of times, skimpy attire, various parts showing, much less physically safe for that woman, much less warm for that. You know, women can get a chill from,
Exposed
you
to
know,
the
evening
elements.
air and so forth, but she's supposed to be, you know, pretty much unveiled. And so there's really an unfair double standard when it comes to modesty. Men get away with modesty a lot easier than women do.
That is,
You know?
I would agree with
You
that.
have it a lot easier than we do. It's just, it's really crazy. But so, you know, modesty at its core is being willing to present myself in a way that enables, and I'm speaking to young women here, that enables young men to get to know me without having to struggle with undue feelings of attraction or summoning up, you know, physical reactions from that young man and getting it to where they want to look me in the face and get to know me as a person.
Yeah, not being someone's stumbling block.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
we need to not monsterify all men either and assume that all they want is you know, sexual things. Men are human beings. They're made in the image of God. And many men want to get to know a woman on that very deep soul level and really come to know them as a person and don't want to be distracted by invasive thoughts of sexual things.
Absolutely, and I mean, when you look at it, if you have a marriage that was predicated on sex, then your marriage is most likely going to fail because you're lacking that true relationship, that friendship, as we've talked about before. That best friend. You need to have the best friend in your spouse.
That's right. I've often wondered why God makes people at the beginning of life so beautiful, and then we tend to lose our looks as we get older. I'm not trying to hurt anyone's feelings here because I'm aging myself, but you know, we go through that prime where we're just as beautiful as we'll ever be, and face it, you know, there is a certain amount of attraction factor in that, and a man becomes interested in a woman and a woman in a man, at least to some degree because of the way they look. I would think it would be better to make them as ugly as they'll ever be during that phase so that you get to know them as a person, but God didn't do it that way, did he? And so we have to kind of wrestle with this powerful physical attraction between males and females and really navigate around it and make sure that we know that we're in it for the right reasons as well.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. You should feel like your wife is, you know, as a guy, as a man, you should feel like your wife is the most beautiful woman in the world.
And you know,
at all stages.
Absolutely. And what happens in the male brain regarding his wife is there's a chemical reaction when they become intimate where there's this huge amount of oxytocin that floods the system. And what happens is that leads to the man sort of imprinting the wife. You see like baby ducks imprinting after their mother. There's an imprint that takes place there where the woman becomes the man's standard of beauty for the rest of his life if it's done right.
Wow.
And every woman will be less beautiful in his mind
Yes, yes.
than she is.
Yes, wow, that's amazing.
It's powerful.
Yes, it is.
And God wants to give men that gift. And if they will be modest and they will appreciate modesty and respect the boundaries that God puts on premarital relationships, then they'll be set up to do just that, to experience just that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Don't take your spouse for granted.
That's right.
Love them while you have them.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've uncovered so much, and it's time for us to go already. Make sure that you check out our website, intimateclarity.tv. And make sure you join us next time on another wonderful episode of Intimate Clarity, where we discuss intimate topics with biblical clarity.